Welcome back, class, to Mr. Sturgeon's classroom. Today we are going to continue Unit 1 with Lesson 1.2, Birth of a Democracy. Now, just a real quick recap of what led to the Declaration of Independence. We covered that with the British helping the colonists fight during the French and Indian War, Britain began to try to control the colonies more, not just financially, but also politically. Now, this would lead to a lot of fighting between colonists and the British who were in America at the time, as well as in Great Britain. And the king or the monarch was really imposing more and more power. Now, the colonists not liking this would lead to the Boston Tea Party. It would lead to the Boston Massacre, which, yes, technically wasn't really that big of a massacre, but it led to a lot of things leading up to the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence, as we've covered, was just a list of grievances or complaints to King George, and really just to the world to see why we were declaring independence and what we thought we needed in a new government. Now, just to kind of look at the colonies, I always ask my students to do this if they can identify the original 13 colonies, because it is not that easy. Now, the reason I make them do this is, like we've covered before, the colonies were not the United States yet. They were all separate. So you had Pennsylvania, had its own government, had its own money, had its own laws. You had South Carolina, same thing, own government, own military, own laws, own coinage. So you had all these different colonies who were trying to be kept together during this age of independence. And it was very, very dangerous because we needed a unified country, really, to fight Great Britain. If we were separate, or if we tried to, do different things, we didn't stand a chance. And so our founding fathers, they very quickly came together and said, you know what, we need to figure out what type of government we want. And so they looked at ancient Greece. And ancient Greece was somewhat similar to our colonies at the time. Ancient Greece had city-states that were all independent: Sparta, Athens, Corinth, Thebes. So they were all different. But you had these groups who would come together in times of crisis in order to fight a common enemy. Let's just say Persia. Now, the 13 colonies saw this and they said, you know what, that sounds like something we need to do. And so Aristotle from ancient Greece, he believed in natural rights. He was one of those people who said, you know what, nature has given everyone certain rights that can't be really taken away from them, that need to be protected. And ancient Greece even allowed every male over 18 the right to vote and run for offices. So they had a lot of really progressive things in ancient Greece. Now I know, yes, no children, no slaves, no women, no foreigners were really allowed in these political arenas. But just for an ancient civilization to have a kind of democratic system, and that would come together in times of crises like, the Persian invasion, it sounds a lot like what our founding fathers created with the 13 colonies. Now, the colonies, they had a few kind of options with the type of power distribution for the government. Now, there is majority rule, which basically means you are ruled by the majority. I mean, it's right there in the name. And that basically means that everybody has a voice. Everybody has a vote. Now, this sounds great. It really does. It sounds like, you know what, everybody should have a voice. And everybody should. But that can lead to a lot of issues, especially in a very young country. Because imagine, back in the day, 13 colonies, where it would take weeks for you to get from Georgia to, let's just say, New York by horse. We didn't have the chance to really take everybody's opinion and voice into account. Not to mention, we did have a lot of slaves. There was still the issue of women being involved with politics. So it was still kind of a white male dominated sphere that they wanted to protect when we founded our country. So majoritarian rule even though in theory sounds great, at the time it wasn't necessarily what our founding fathers wanted for a new country. Now, there was also the elite kind of power distribution. Now, this is again kind of like an oligarchy where a small or wealthy or powerful group of people share the power. Now, they'll all basically share the same kind of ideals. Not ideal for a new country, mainly because we were kind of already coming from that with Great Britain, where we had a monarchy and oligarchy where they really controlled the commoner. So our founding fathers, they didn't really want to go back to that. Now, there are two more groups or two more power distributions that our founding fathers looked towards. There was the pluralist theory. Now, this comes up a lot on the AP government exam, pluralist theory. And what that meant was two or more groups, or what would become known as factions, could coexist, but they could also compete for authority. And this was the United States today. It was the United States for the most part back then. And it basically allowed a few groups to coexist. Now, these groups could work together and, work for the common good. Sometimes they could compete. Maybe one had a different idea than the other, but it wasn't too diverse where it was like you have like 12 different groups who all want different things. That's very tough to manage. So the pluralist theory was kind of just right in the middle. It was just like Goldilocks, not too much one way, not too much the other. It was where a few groups could coexist or compete and rule the country that it was ruling at the time. Hyper-pluralist is like a lot of groups or a lot of factions trying to run a country or a government. Now, that just can't happen because it's going to be too diverse. There's going to be too many groups wanting different things. And that's why I have this tug of war. It's like there's different groups and you're all trying to pull some way and you're just not going to get anything done. It's going to be really difficult for you to compromise, and there's going to be so much competition that it's going to be difficult to really run a country. So think of this one right here, this picture, as the hyper-pluralist theory. Then you have the pluralist theory, which might be more like, this one where it's two groups, maybe 3 or 4 groups who can compete or work together. If these kids wanted to all pull to one side, they could, or they could kind of compete to see whose idea was better. That was kind of the idea our founding fathers wanted in terms of distributing power to the people and to the government. And so we'll come to the final slide, and we really came down to two theories, a democracy versus a republic. Now, you could ask many people on the street, what type of government does America have? I would guess 6, 7 out of 10 of them would say we live in a democracy. Technically, yes, but not exactly. If we're going pure direct democracy, you are saying it is ruled by the people. Every single person votes. Every single person has a voice. Anytime a law needs to be passed, anytime there needs to be an amendment, every single person gets a vote. That's direct democracy. Now, it sounds good in theory, but again, kind of going back to what I said about our founding fathers, it would be very difficult to get every single colonist to vote on something. So direct democracy, yes, everybody gets a voice, but that is very difficult in terms of logistics and in terms of running a government. It's very difficult. Now, there was a republic, which think of ancient Rome. You're ruled by elected officials. Now, the people vote for these representatives for the most part, not always. Sometimes they are not voted directly from the people, which is the difference with our current government. And a republic is where you would elect an official and they would basically run the country for you. Now, ancient Rome's a little different because not every official was elected, which is why we aren't technically a republic either. Our founding fathers, again, wanted something in between. They worried that if we went with a direct democracy and every citizen could participate, they could be subject to temporary popular passions or factions. Now think of it this way. If Kanye West runs for president this year, he can get votes as the president. I don't know how many, but let's just say as a candidate, he gets 100,000 votes. And that's just because he's popular. He might get more than that. Now, that's something our founding fathers were worried about, was that if everybody gets a voice, they're just going to vote for whatever's popular at the time, or for whoever is popular at the time. So they really worried about this direct democracy structure because they were worried that people would be influenced too much and that factions or groups could control the people and the way they voted. Let's just say a faction says, you know what, if you vote for us, everybody's going to get $100,000 every year from the government. Yeah, you can promise that. You might even get votes for that, but logistically that might not work. So they decided on a representative democracy. Whenever you are asked what type of government America has, it's a representative democracy, which means all of our officials, except for judges in most cases, are elected by the people to vote on their behalf. So what that means is it's similar to a republic, but we elect for every single representative who represents us in the government. We elect our representatives, we elect our senators up until the 17th Amendment, but we elect pretty much everybody who represents us in the government. So we were, again, kind of right in the middle. We weren't a direct democracy, but we weren't necessarily a republic. We were right in between a representative democracy. So what we have is we have somebody who we elect, who goes on our behalf and runs the government for us. Now, if we don't like what they do, well, then we can always unelect them or elect a new person when their term is up. So we decided on becoming a representative democracy, which will lead us to the next lesson, 1.3, where you're going to talk about our founding fathers. Not all of them, but we will talk about a few of them who were the foundation of creating our new government and creating the country that we know today. Hope you enjoy.